Hello and welcome to another video, and I am very late with this, considering this was posted September 6th, and it is currently the 24th or whatever when I'm recording this. Yes, I'm almost 20 days late on doing this, but it is a very long post. This is the Alpha Balance PTS Results and Roadmap, and I wanted to give it the proper discussion it needed. And as such, this video will be long and relatively rambly, and I might need to jump around as I remember aspects of the comments I wanted to give to it, so bear with me. But this would be a perfect something to just relatively ignore the video, as it's more of a podcast type video that should go on for a while. But anyway, the Alpha Balance PTS series completed. They thanked everyone that did the testing and gave feedback, and they have decisions. They're going to go ahead with specific things that they outline in this post. Heatsink changes, weapon changes, mobility changes, and quirk changes. They give here a brief summary of the previous PTSs, which we'll go through as well right now. In PTS 1, they focus on different weapon systems, mainly the clan lasers, reduced their damage, but also shifted around some cooldowns and heat efficiency to maintain some ratios. So, for example, if we pop into the spreadsheet warrior and pop over to the Alpha PTS weapons, we can see four things where they did PTS version 1.1 and 0.2 sort of thing, where they would lower the damage, but then they'd also lower the heat and lower the cooldown, so DPS is about the same, damage per heat is about the same. And that's what they were focusing on then. For PTS, the next session, they're focused on laser weapon durations, so that we're not looking at nerfing so much of the damage, but taking the heavily community-focused feedback, as I say here, utilizing a different method that is seen as more tolerable from player feedback. They focused on durations. So, for example, we had some good examples of it. The things like the heavy large laser. It got its damage back up to 18, but it gained an extra 0.2 seconds of duration, so that the damage per duration was lower, about the same of what they were trying to do before with the damage nerf, but you would still have the total damage. Make it a little bit harder to hold on target. It takes a little bit longer to get all that damage into one spot, and that's what they tested there. Of course, throughout all of this, they had a clan Gauss rifles giving some recoil, and with the 1.1, they toned down some of the durability quirks on specific IS mechs. Now, I do agree with their tone down of specific mechs. There are things that are just like, oh, holy crap, you're about as durable as a mech that is a whole nother class higher than you. For things like the Bushwhacker, you're more durable than most heavies in that sense. Of course, there are the mechs, like the quintessential example being the Hunchback, where you do need a quirk on that right torso because it's a larger target. But these were the mechs that were still relatively decent hitboxes, but just had massive durability. I had no issues with what they were changing there for the changes to durability quirks. Moving on to 2.0 and 2.1, this was the big one. This is where they did the entire rework of the heatsink functionality. So, like we had back here in Spreadsheet Warrior, we had the heat changes where they increased the dissipation to full true dubs. They lowered the base heat capacity to 40 for the first test, and the 2.1 changes was 50 as the base heat. And we'll get into the final changes here in a second, but they were looking at how can we balance alpha through heat, and also they changed a lot of mobility values for a bunch of the mechs. this was interesting. And they have a really great paragraphs here about the role of heat in MWO, which I want to spend a few minutes talking about, because it's really good to hear them say their thoughts here on what they think that heat's role is, and what other systems we could possibly put in there to help manage alphas. The 2.0 and 2.1, the first one where it was at 40 heat, we got to the point where, yeah, you actually need to start to take a couple weapons off of these obscurely hard-hitting alpha strikes, namely the ones that were using Gauss rifles in order to use their very high damage per heat ratios. So you needed to take an extra ER medium or two off of your heavy large laser design on your MagCat Mark IIs. You actually lowered some of the alpha strikes because you just couldn't alpha it without shutting down. That was interesting. For the 2.1 changes, they increased that so that it was a bit more flexible. You could do the Boogeyman 92 damage, or what is it, 94 damage? Can't remember, it's been a while. With the 4 ER mediums, 2 heavy large, and the 2 Gauss rifles, you could do that build and not shut down, and that build would have a faster cooling rate. In which case, when we have the refiring of those weapons, as I did some calculations here, based on the fact that we had that capacity for that particular 59.2 heat from that alpha strike of 94 damage or whatever it was, previously we would be able to refire after just only like 9.5 seconds because we would have extra capacity. But then after that, we'd have to wait while we'll cool down, but generally not an issue because we're typically repositioning after a couple alpha strikes. Where under the new system, we have pretty much the same because we're going to hit our heat cap and we'd have to wait the full duration. So it'd be less frequent alpha strikes. You can still do it, but you're penalized by maybe, say, 3 seconds between when you could refire under the old system to when you could refire under the new system. So less frequency gives that person 3 more seconds in order to reach cover, which is fairly significant if you're already being like, oh shit, he hit me and I'm running full speed, I'm heading to cover. When a mech's going full speed for 3 seconds, they can actually cover a fair amount of ground. So that's where that change was affecting the game. But they say in here that they didn't like the core weapons that dealt high amounts of heat spikes with the PPCs, AC-20s, and those kind of builds. They didn't feel like it worked for them. The changes were too targeted at laser Gauss combo builds and things like that, because those were the ones that they were trying to knock down, but they inadvertently knocked down builds that were not that much of an issue. Now, I'm going to spend a little while here within the role of heat of MWO, because this is a really good conversation to have. And I'm just going to find the exact quotes in here. We want to take the time to state that the heat system's primary role within MWO is not to curtail high alpha use, but to provide a resource pool in which mech warriors can tap for short-term gains at the expense of longer period of vulnerability. I think that is a very telling sentence of what the heat system is for in this game. I've personally looked at the heat system kind of like, say, stamina on a character. So if you're playing a game, say, like Dark Souls or something, you would have an attack that would use a certain amount of stamina. You generally can go in and do a great big plethora of attacks really, really quickly and use up your stamina. Then you have to fall back, put up your shield, and retreat, and do some positioning afterwards to regain it. Once it's done, you can go back in and do another combo. Alternatively, you can ration it as you wish, where you could do an attack, fall back, do a double attack, fall back again, and constantly topping it back up. That would be the equivalent of a person going forward, firing off a whole bunch of weapons, getting really toasty, and then retreating back into cover, repositioning while they are cooling off, but being in that vulnerable state. It was something that, God, way back the day when I still played Dark Souls PvP, where it was a very important thing to do was to gauge the enemy's stamina so you knew when to push them. When that, oh, if I just hit him one more time in his shield, it's going to break, and then I can get him. I viewed the heat system in MechWarrior Online the same kind of way, and that's basically, if I'm interpreting this correctly, what they're saying here. So they don't want to make it so that you basically can't do a big attack because you don't have enough stamina in your mech. It would be the same as lowering the character's stamina in something like Dark Souls, so you couldn't do a two-handed overhead attack because it's too strong. You just can't do that without your character going into a break state where he's vulnerable for a second. I agree with him on this. Again, this is, of course, something that people will know that I'm for a system similar to energy draw. If they're saying that they don't want to use heat to be that alpha curtailment, then the heat scale system we have currently is kind of going against that design philosophy, because it is using heat to curtail specific alphas. And the energy draw system would also use heat to curtail alphas, at least in the way that I have proposed it, and Almost Bill and stuff like that have proposed it in the past. I wonder if there's more things we could do there. Could we just do an energy draw that is just, if you don't have points, you don't fire? And that's that? No extra heat. It's just, oh, you tried to shoot, but you don't have the points for it, so it didn't shoot, sort of feeling. I don't know. That's a totally another discussion we're going to continue through here. But yeah. MWO attempts to replicate this with its, their push the mech past its heat capabilities to exploit an opening or a turn at the expense of reduced performance in subsequent turns. They're talking about how the original Battletech game was like this. MWO attempts to replicate this with the threshold dissipation, general weapons cooldowns. So you want to be able to push your mech to exploit something and then have to deal with that vulnerability afterwards. The balance between burst damage and alpha strike, burst damage, alpha strike, and then high sustained DPS is their focus of the team. And they said that, of course, we're never going to fully attempt to remove high burst, but to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand and so vast that you just can't brawl. So using the heat bar exclusively as alpha mitigation tool alters the design intention and is not what they want to do. So I think that is a very telling couple paragraphs that gives us the mentality of the devs so that we can understand what they want from the game. And if we are going to be giving suggestions on how they can change the game, I believe that they would be more apt to listen and be open to suggestions that fall within their mentalities and their design goals. So we have to think about that. When we're making alpha strike limiters in the future, let's not focus around heat as the main penalty system. Maybe. They go along to talk about the heatsink changes with 2.0, 2.1. Regarding the shutdown threshold, we do see value in reducing it in total because that would lower the amount that these big alpha strikes could fire and be refiring pretty quickly, which is what we saw with the refire timing calculations that I did. So they see some value in these numbers here. We feel that the PTS changes pushed this dial too far into the sustained DPS camp and too aggressively punished all but the most highly optimized high alpha builds, which are the ones that use Gauss, because Gauss is just ridiculous in its damage per heat ratios. Chief among them being the high damage, high heat stuff, which, again, doesn't have the ratio of Gauss. You got the non-laser weapons of PPC, AC-20, and mass SRMs, and they just weren't really effectively being able to use their loadouts because they were nerfed too hard at the same time as when we were trying to nerf the highly optimized builds. So if we put the nerf at the level where highly optimized builds that use relatively broken weapons with the Gauss rifle, then everything else that's not equivalently broken in terms of its damage per heat ratio can't compete, which is a very valid concern. So that they're not going to go with a flat value, but they are going to be lowering the amount that you gain per heatsink. Also, really cool thing, which is I can't remember which video that I did for the PTS where I mentioned this, that because they're going to be the breakaway from differentiating between internal heatsinks and external player-placed heatsinks, we're no longer going to need to artificially enhance sub 250 engine rating mechs because all the heatsinks will be the same. It's not like if you're stuck taking a 225 and you need that additional heatsink before will be only a 0.15 compared to the 0.20 you get in your engine. So they'd have to artificially enhance all of your dissipation in order to make it relatively the same as a mech that could take a 250. They don't have to do that anymore because all the heatsinks are the same. So that's excellent. So there are certain quirks that they will be able to phase out, but they'll still keep some of them around. And we'll get to that in the quirk section below. But here are the final changes that they're going to be putting into the October patch, which should be, at the point of this recording, maybe 3 weeks from now? 2.5 weeks? Something like that. We're going to have the base heat being increased from 30 to 45. So no matter what, you're going to get 15 extra points. The capacity given by single heatsinks and the dissipation. The dissipation is going slightly up to 0.14. The capacity is being reduced by a little under half, down to 0.85. And the differences between internal and external are removed, which I don't think was an issue with internal heatsinks before, but whatever. They just removing those things for all of them to be consistent, which is good. Consistency is awesome. So old single heatsinks have been slowly increasing over the years from where they used to be before with 0.1, and they were 0.11 or 0.12, now they were 0.13, now they're 0.14. They're essentially where the old double heatsink was at 0.15. So old double heatsinks are now single heatsinks. A lot more dissipation there. But this is where it gets really crazy. For both Clan and Inner Sphere, double heatsinks are going from 0.15 to 0.22. Not even to just dubs. Not even just 0.2. We're going past dubs. We're going to dub plus 10%. This is true doubles, or whatever we're going to call it. Way more dissipation. But the heat capacity has been reduced from 1.5 per sync to 0.5 per sync. So you're losing a whole heat capacity. So you basically just count up your max heat sinks and then just go, that's the total amount of capacity that I'm losing comparatively. However, that doesn't really apply for the engine heat sinks because the base heat bar increase is going to compensate for that. Also, quirks, corrective heat adjustments, like I said up here, sub 250 rated mechs are going to be generally phased out because we don't need them anymore, but some may stay around for flavor. They do also have some charts here, so you can see dissipation rate. We've got the old doubles on the orange, the new doubles on the yellow, and then the old singles and the new singles in the gray and blue. So the new doubles are just out of the way higher, and the new singles are just slight buff. And then we come to shutdown thresholds. We can see that the new single heatsink threshold is actually slightly higher than it was before. But because of the increased base with the lower per heatsink increase, for all of the old numbers, it's actually going to stay at 50. So the old double heatsink value for 10, the new double heatsink value for 10, and the old single heatsink value for 10 is all staying the same at 50, which is actually kind of cool how the numbers work out from that. But then right after that, we see how it differentiates, where the old double heatsinks would shoot up and pass everything up to 80 when we had 30 heatsinks. The new double heatsink is just going to barely climb, so it's only going to get to 60 by the time you're at 30. So take whatever external heatsinks, although they're removing that concept, take whatever heatsink you have past your engine and minus that number from your old capacity, and that's how much new capacity you have for your double heatsinks. Now, you can take a look at the spreadsheet warrior. We've got final heat changes. We can see the difference between the live, the PTS, and the final changes. When we hit at the heatsink count of 10, we can see that our cooling rate is already 2.2, which is where we would have been at several more heatsinks under live. So take, for example, you have a clan mech that has lasers on it, maybe 25 heatsinks. That's not unreasonable. You get 25 heatsinks on a heavy or an assault mech. On live, we're going to have 4.25 cooling without any increases for heat dissipation and such. With the new changes, we're going to have 5.5. That would be equivalent for us having 33 heatsinks or an additional 8. Not only that, with the plus 10% you get from the skill tree, that is going to factor, because it's a percentage, stronger on the new numbers. So I have to rerun the numbers of whether or not heat removal with heat, like minus heat onto the weapon tree, is still better than plus dissipation out of the dissipation tree, because there is going to be a significant change in the amount of dissipation that specific mechs can have. This doesn't really affect mechs with low quantity heatsinks comparatively. Because before, prior to 10 heatsinks, if you had doubles and they were in the engine, they were already doubles. We already had 0.2 on those. So that doesn't change much. Even with the final being 0.22, it's only 2.2. It's only 0.2 better. It's only like one heatsink better. So it's not that much of an increase. Where when you get higher, the change here obviously gets much higher, and it's more like a 8 or a 10 heatsink increase comparatively from the amount of cooling you have. So your brawl builds that are like 10 to 14 heatsinks, your roughnecks with AC20 and SRMs, how I like to run my powerhouse, those kind of mechs, all of your mediums, specific your IS mediums, all of your IS heavies that aren't trying to take extra heatsinks or be laser focused, they're not really going to get much of a buff in terms of dissipation because they just don't carry enough heatsinks. Clan mechs are going to get a massive increase in the amount of dissipation they can do. Specifically, mid-range mediums and up. When you have something like a Huntsman that can take, I don't know, what can Huntsman take? It's like 7 or 8 extra heat sinks with its medium pulse laser build? Something like that. If I'm getting up to 18, 19 heat sinks with a clan medium, I'm all of a sudden going from 3.2 to 3.96, which is equivalent of 23 heat sinks. So I'm gaining, like 5 heat sinks worth of value. There's just 5 tons more of value in my clan mech because clan mechs have more space. Their endo and their ferro are smaller by half. Their heat sinks are smaller by a slot. So they can just spam more of them. Anytime you increase something by a percentage, the person who has more is getting more of a buff. So this is going to vastly change the amount of cooling that clan mechs have compared to IS, because the IS simply cannot stack as many heat sinks as a clan can. If you get up to like 20 something heat sinks on a clan and an IS assault, oh wow, you've got a lot of heat sinks packed into there. Where are you getting all those slots? You don't have endo, you don't have ferro, because you don't have the space for it. But if you have 20 heat sinks on a clan mech, what you packing in there? Because you got a bunch of space. It's vastly going to increase clan cooling and clan strength in my opinion. So I don't know how this is a good thing. If they at the same time said, oh yeah, and we're also going to make it so IS double heat sinks are 2 slots, I go, well, that's something. That actually balances out a lot more. But as it stands, clan mechs are getting a buff. And then we can see the live. You can get up to like 80 with 30 heat sinks. PTS had just a fixed value, which was a massive decrease. And the final is going to have that slightly increasing rate. Still a decrease, just not as massive. Which I'm okay actually with these capacity numbers. I'm not that okay with the dissipation numbers. But back to the sheet here. So they got some known issues. Basically, these known issues boil down to these systems interact with the heat system. Therefore, when we change the heat system, how they interact will change. And we don't know how we're going to change them yet, but we'll get to that in the future. That's essentially what they say here. They have the heat penalties for the Intersphere Light and Clan XL side torso destruction, the stealth armor, which takes away your mech's ability to cool, and that kind of stuff, and then also flamers, which heat up your mech. If there's a lot more cooling on the field, flames will be less effective, and that kind of stuff. They don't know how they're going to change it, but they're going to see how it goes. Moving on to weapon changes. Oh, so many things that we've already talked about, but with all the above in mind, and you guys can take a look at this if you wish, they're changing ER larges for both Clan and IS, increasing heat, and they're reducing the heat for the ER large laser. Specifically, the community doc put together the ER large laser was too spammy. And we ourselves find that it can sometimes cover too many bases on its own. We may find it to be really problematic as you go up in the tonnage range. Lighter ton mechs not able to use the weapon, but then heavy assault mechs have like 5 ER larges and they're just spamming it and blah blah blah. And you're just able to do a bunch of damage from long range with okay heat efficiency. Supposedly. This isn't gonna change anything, in my opinion, with the upper changes here to the heat dissipation. If you're increasing our dissipation by like 50%, which is what this is, because a 0.15, yeah, let's see, it's a 0.75, 0.075 increase. It's about that. So it's about a 50% increase in the amount that we're cooling. A 20% something, 15% increase in our heat? Who cares? Comparatively, those mechs that are able to fire those ER large lasers are going to be firing them way more often because they have way more heat dissipation. They're not going to care about their capacity. They'll just fire it a little less often. Whatever, in their opinion. I don't see how this is going to change anything, these changes. Already, these weapons, if I go to my proposed weapons page, what I would like to do with these weapons, say the ER large laser here for the clans, is they're going to say they want to increase this to 11.8 and they want to decrease this to 10.75. That's what they want to do with it. So that the damage per heat would go down to 0.91 compared to 1.02. But is 1.02 like crazy? They're specifically targeting the heat because they want it to be the thing that stops it from being spammy. But 1.02 is already one of the lowest damage per heats in the game. Only really comparatively, we have the Inner Sphere ERPPC, which is notoriously hot for its damage. And we've got the Clan ERPPC, which, well, no, that's the Flamer, which is about the same as the ER large laser, and it's notoriously hot for what it does. So the ER large laser, it's not that it's too cold. I would postulate that it's because it's too easy to shoot. Because it hit scan and it is long range brain dead damage. I specifically would love, absolutely love, if the max range, which is normally ×2 of the effective, currently it is set at, I can't remember what the exact one here is. Got to go into my actual weapons page that has non-modified values. It is at 740, or was that reduced recently? But it's around 700 something, with the max range being 1400 and something. You could tickle people from across the goddamn map with this thing. That's personally why I find it too spammy. I don't care about a person's large laser when they're close to me. It's not like that weapon has an absolute amazing damage per heat and they're doing so much. It's a great brawling weapon. No, it's because there's a jackass a kilometer away tickling my back with his spammy ER larges because he can hit and actually do effective damage at that range. Personally, that's what I find spammy about them. I, like I say here, would like to see a base range reduction down to something like 700. And then the max range be 0.15 or maybe even 0.14 of the optimal. Just get rid of the concept of having laser weapons that shoot over a kilometer. If you fire over a kilometer, you have to be a projectile because therefore you have to have skill to land those shots. You can't just be a brain-dead damage farmer with ER large lasers a kilometer away from the battle going, I'm helping. And I'm being very sarcastic now, but I'm trying to get my point across. Accounting for the incoming threshold changes where the extra heat burden will put more pressure on the heavier mechs that carry a large amount of them. No, there won't be. They'll have higher dissipation by like 50%. They won't give a shit about the higher heat burden unless you change this heat from like 10 to like 15. And then it'd be like, oh, wow, that's a 50% increase, which matches the amount of increase we're going to get from our heat dissipation. So it's actually going to be something we need to think about. No, they're not going to be spammy. I mean, you're not going to reduce the spamminess. They're going to get more spammy because you're going to fire them more often because you got more heat dissipation. Similar things, they slightly reduced the damage for all of the, so we got the Clan ER Medium, we got the Clan Medium Pulse, and the Clan Heavy Large. Fine. I actually don't care about these changes. You're reducing their damage slightly. They were pretty damaging. They're pretty strong. If we take those numbers into effect from 7 to 6.5, and we look at some things like that. Where are they? I even think I already asked for that. That was something I already put into my proposed weapons, was to reduce their damage. So I'm fine with it. Did I put that for the medium pulse? I didn't. But yeah, I'm fine with that. Like, I had already predicted that or proposed that change in my spreadsheet, so I really don't care about these changes for the mediums. It's just slightly reducing the damage that mid-range poke is going to do. It slightly affects medium range mechs that, say, are boating 5 or 6 medium pulse lasers and trying to be sort of a mid-range brawly build. That's fine. I would have liked to have the... If this was just a vacuum and just this change, I would have liked to have the reduction in cooldown and heat to go along with it in order to maintain ratios, but with a massive increase in heat dissipation, who cares? Because clans are going to get way more heat dissipation. And those are all coming in the October patch. Now for mobility. Be it 20 tonners to 100 tonners, all mech classes need to have a functional place in MechWarrior Online. If an entire class of mechs cannot meaningfully contribute to a skirmish-based combat match, it does not work well for that weight class, and no weight classes in MechWarrior Online exist for the sole reason to be another mech's fodder. So the main thing that they're coming across here is that previously, before the engine desync, there was heavy and assault mechs that were really too mobile for their good. Mainly it was from their ability to turn. From you spamming jump jets, using torso turn rate to be able to whip around and pick off a light mech that was swinging her into our backsides. So before they could do that, it negatively affected light play, because when you have a mech with dual heavy Gauss or something along those lines that can whip its firepower around to the front in a matter of seconds, then you're just like, oh, shit, I don't want to get behind this thing. I don't even want to get close to it, because then it can just end me with one shot. So the engine desync massively realigns the general performance. Mechs with heavy assault still excel at massive damage dealers, but no longer super responsive, so that lights and mediums can push them and do their roles. I totally get that, and I totally agree. But, as they state here, some mechs have fallen behind since introduction. As a generality, we will not be looking to this return to the state in which heavies and assaults marginalize lighter counterparts, but some particular chassis have been negatively affected by the change, which is expected. If you change absolutely everybody all at the same time, some people deserved it, some people didn't. So they're going to go back and change some of them up. They did that in the PTS 2 and 2.1, where they saw a bunch of positive feedback. They're like, oh, of course, when I did my video, when I was talking about the Atlas and its torso twistability, I was like, oh, I can finally tank damage now. I can twist it onto my arm. Like, I can be an Atlas brawler. Yes, it was great. And specifically, they say in here, while we are satisfied with the increases to some of the lighter mechs, we're not so satisfied with some of the increases viewing on the heavier spectrum. Basically, they just don't want to fall into that trap of having the heavies and assaults too mobile so that they can take their firepower and have it too easy to put onto enemy lights. So with all of that, considering the above, there are plenty of areas we can target for improvements, and they're going to be improving some mechs over the next few months. And they already did this in September. So these ones have already gone into the game. The Firestarter, Hellspawn, Thanatos, Alice, Adder, Viper, Stormcrow, Kodiak. I'm okay with mobility changes for most mechs, because I like the game when it's more mobile. Tiny bit faster paced, a little bit easier to have a get out of jail free card by being able to go, oh, I'm in a bad position, and then immediately jump out of the way, if you know how to do that. Get yourself out of bad situations. It increases your lifespan. But as they were saying up here, we are satisfied with the increases to some of the lighter mechs. I will note that Firestarter and Adder were the only two lights here, with maybe you could call the Viper a light in terms of how it plays. Hellspawn's kind of a light if you're stretching your definition of light or light-like roles, because the Hellspawn's more of like a striker type thing. It doesn't have the weight to just be a mech of the line to stand there and take it, and to be something to be shooting from cover like a Bushwhacker can or a Hunchback can, where it is just with the heavies doing what heavies do. I would have expected there to be more lights here. Just saying. I would have expected to be like 6 lights and a couple assault mechs or something like that to do the first round of changes. We'll see what they come out in October and December. The Atlas got some torso twisting ability. It's improved my DDC on the free-to-play account, which is I'm happy about. So just keep with the mobility. Keep upping mobility until we hit that threshold of awesomeness. And then Quirk Changes, getting very close to the end to wrap this up, is that they are slowly reducing the mass defense quirks for a handful of IS mechs. Like I said before, it was for the mechs that had mass durability across their entire mech, just for the sake of being a balance leverage. I personally don't really like quirks, and I want to say that with a caveat. I see their importance, and I don't want to get rid of them entirely, but I feel like quirks are kind of like balance, smoke, and mirrors. Because if some of the core underlying systems of a game were more balanced, and I know that's sort of like flying in the face of like, well, but that's not Battletech, that's just Stompy Warrior Online. Like I said before, with the heatsinks being different sizes, the Endo and Pharaoh being different sizes and different strengths, like the amount of weight they reduce, the XL balance debacle, if some of that stuff was more fair, there wouldn't be as many quirks in the game, because the devs have to go into the whole situation with essentially an unbalanced scale in front of them, and then they have to weight down one side with quirks in order to get it balanced. So I dislike the fact that we're in that situation where it's like, here's a fundamentally unbalanced base game. If they removed all quirks, let's just add numbers to one side until it's balanced. I don't know. But I totally agree with them that those needed for parts of geometry and for particular flavors, like I don't want to get rid of durability on the Bushwhacker. I like the idea of the Bushwhacker being a scrappy little brawler and that being its identity. I love that. I don't want to get rid of it. But it's sometimes too much. And I agree with them on this. I would probably be more aggressive in those reductions, but that's me coming from my situation. They're just being kid gloves for now, taking a little bit away at a time to see what goes on. And then as well, the heatsink changes and the 250 rated engines, which we discussed earlier, because they're getting rid of the idea of external and internal heatsinks, which is all coming in the October patch, which again is like 3 weeks away from when I record this. And then in conclusion, we'd like to extend a big thank you to all the community members that took their time to extensively test and provide feedback. And I thank those community members as well, as if we don't give them feedback, we'll have no way to guide the ship to where we want it. They're asking for the feedback. They may interpret it their way. They may decide that we've got all this feedback, but we feel that this is the right way, but at least we can give it. In my opinion, I like to say this for a few things. You can't complain about the rain if you don't bring an umbrella. You can't complain about the outcome of something if you didn't look into it and give your opinion or prepare for it. It's the same thing when it's raining outside. It's the same thing when people complain about LRMs and they don't have AMS or ECM. And it's the same thing when people complain about outcomes of elections or things like that and they didn't vote. It's the same concept. So get on these PTSs, give your feedback on the forums, which is where they look primarily. And on the last note, I have to give major kudos to PGI. Because this particular set of testing was the absolute best in terms of getting rewards for testing. Every single test session had an event where you could earn a couple million C-bills for doing 10 matches or so. Fucking glorious. It was beautiful. A round of applause to PGI for that, because we've asked for that for a long time and they did it. Thank you for doing that. It encourages people to get on and at least try it. At least read the notes so they know what's happening. I would love to see some metrics to see if that actually did increase the amount of people they had testing. Because if it did, that's positive. Because I can't remember the stat. A long time ago when we had public testing, they made some comment on how only a small percentage, like sub 10% of the population, I have no idea if that's the actual number, don't quote me on that, I'll have to go try to find it, but they said that only a small quantity of the population actually got on and tested. The rest of them just sort of read the notes and yelled about it on Reddit. Or didn't even pay attention because it's not something that I care about. Probably the majority of the player base is just like, I play this for fun and don't really care. And then the people that we are having these conversations with on Reddit and in Discords and on the forums are like this, like 10 to 20% of the player base that are like, oh my god, this is so important. But we must have conversations and we must get on the public test for those people. So thank you for PGI for giving us those incentives. They help my free-to-play account greatly. Give me several more million C-bills to buy more mechs. This was long. This was overdue. Thank you mainly for just listening to me ramble for, oh my god, 50 minutes. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching or listening, and good hunting.